Good evening. My name is Jen Afmefane, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to UROC. We have a very special event planned for you today, one that focuses on a very timely topic and one that focuses on people from all different walks of life and different backgrounds. Before we begin, I want to first acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. Minnesota comes from the Dakota word named for this region, and it loosely translates to the land where waters reflect the skies. It is important to acknowledge the people on whose land we live, learn, and work on as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Next, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Lori Van Ingram, who is our Vice Provost of Public Engagement.
Thanks, Jen. Welcome, everybody. Yes, I'm Lori Van Egeren. I'm Vice Provost for Public Engagement at the University of Minnesota. I want to welcome you. This is a really meaningful day because in addition to this wonderful and incredibly important event, we had our Public Engagement Awards for the University of Minnesota, where we get to see just many phenomenal awardees of work that are done with faculty, staff, students in partnership with community to make really meaningful changes that are driven by community, responsive to community, co-developed with community. And of course, UROC is really the epitome of all that. So I'm really honored to join you for Critical Conversations. I also want to especially thank Chief Deputy Attorney General John C. Keller for agreeing to join us this evening. Do you want to wave? If you haven't attended before, Critical Conversations is a series of public discussions that UROC has been hosting for many years. These gatherings bring together scholars, activists, historians, artists, and community leaders to address urban issues and ideas. Previous topics have included the opioid epidemic, energy cost, maternal health outcomes, and home ownership. These conversations build on the many campus-community relationships that UROC has formed and give the community time to come together to learn, listen, and grow. Before we begin, I want to introduce Adriana Udani, UROC's Director of Community Engaged Research. You want to wave? You're going to come up here in a minute, but Adriano came to UROC last August from the University of Missouri St. Louis, and he was absolutely the right person, and we were so excited to get him. Adriano specializes in the study of political attitudes toward immigrant groups and how those attitudes influence beliefs. Here, he leads UROC's mission-driven work related to facilitating ethically responsible and reciprocal research partnerships between the university and urban communities. We're very happy to have him on the team, and Adriana will be moderating tonight's discussion, and I will now pass this on to him.
Good evening. It's so wonderful to see a full room for a very important topic and a pressing topic that is on the minds of a lot of people here. After 100 days in office, President Donald Trump has the lowest public approval ratings compared to other presidents since Dwight Eisenhower. This includes Trump's first term as president. Nevertheless, polls indicate over 90% of Republicans still approve of how he is leading the country. Over a third of US voters approve of how he is handling immigration. And a recent Brookings study by Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, Michael Roberts, and Ade Romero Briones, the authors estimated that while Native American voters leaned Democratic in the 2024 elections, 39% still supported Trump. These numbers are concerning for many, as he continues this week to use executive orders to target sanctuary cities, and is directing the Attorney General to prioritize the prosecution of government officials and advocates who willfully and unlawfully direct the obstruction of enforcing criminal law, which the Trump administration has expanded to include deportation orders, as well as other things. Last month, the Trump administration revoked 18 executive actions from the Biden administration, including one that strengthened tribal sovereignty and expanded self-determination. At UROC, and the work we do with our community partners in the metro region and statewide, we join with other Minnesotans to learn how the political climate is impacting migrant and tribal communities on the ground level. And we stand with them in their fight for justice, in their pursuit of dignity, and learning how we can practically stand with them as supporters and allies. So to facilitate this discussion, we would like to welcome the Minnesota's Chief Deputy Attorney General, John Keller.
Good afternoon. Set a timer so that a lawyer doesn't talk too long, and want to get to the leaders who are generously here with us as well. I am not Keith Ellison. I have the great honor to be the Chief Deputy working for Keith, and have been there since he took office as the Attorney General. My work prior to that was 20 plus years as the director and staff attorney at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and so spent a good chunk of my career with all avenues of representation and advocacy on behalf of immigrants and refugees in the state of Minnesota and nationally. We took office in January of 2019, which was the last 2 years of Trump 1.0, and we are now considered among the more tenured AGs in Trump 2.0 in the work that we're conducting, trying to stop some of the more egregious and unlawful and unconstitutional actions that the administration has taken. I think if Keith were here as a North Sider and a longtime advocate on all things immigrant and refugees, he would say something along the lines of, thank you for being here, thank you for showing up for people. This is a fight that you can 100% count on him and all of those like myself who work for him, as long as it takes. You know, I'll talk a little bit about some of the actions that we've taken. With today's lawsuit, I think we're now at 19 cases that we have brought against the administration, ourselves and other AGs, sometimes all of us, sometimes a smaller handful of us. I'll also say on, you know, in terms of what I bring to the conversation, part of my time when I was a much younger attorney, I started at Immigrant Law Center, and my primary task was naturalization, helping people make that final step from green card holder to naturalization. And I did a lot of work with refugee communities, people who could not acquire English, who needed waivers because of either disabilities or age or mental health. And I did that for a couple of years, and I consider the naturalization side of the practice of immigration to be among the most positive. Even though not everybody becomes a citizen, those that can do that, you know, take that final step as they walk into the immigration office as a green card holder, sometimes people who've had their green cards for 20 or 30 years, and make that final step to become a U.S. citizen. That part of my practice immediately followed with full-time deportation defense. I think I started in 2000, and then the seminal moment was the 9/11 attack. Followed by the Patriot Act, followed by an entire array of the U.S. government signaling that they would do everything within its power to make sure that 9/11 never happened again. And what they did was require mostly Muslim foreign nationals who were here in temporary statuses to submit to interviews with the FBI to determine whether or not they were terrorists. And I raised kind of that juxtaposition of, on the one hand, as a young attorney, helping people move from permanent residency to citizenship versus what I thought was the lowest point of my practice period in terms of this advocacy on behalf of non-citizens. That's not me, I'm sorry. And I connected to today because one of the first things as an immigration practitioner that I am aware of when I read story after story of the actions this administration is taking are connections, things that bring me back to my past practice when I was a full-time immigration attorney. And one, I think it might have even been sort of replayed on the news today in the highlights, if you will, of the first 100 days, was the arrest of a person who walked in Maine, if I'm not mistaken, to his citizenship interview. I can't remember what country he's from now, but he's a Muslim, and was detained by ICE in the parking lot. Or, the images you see are ICE walking him out of that last step that so many people want to take to become citizens. And instead, this administration, you've seen, has taken the step of zero tolerance isn't the right word, but something like it, of maximum enforcement, including of permanent residents. One of the things that I think we talk about a fair amount when we have a chance to talk about the moment that we're in as AGs, as Democratic AGs, and Keith has said this most recently in a media interview, and that is that, it is not our desire every morning to wake up and find new reasons or ways to sue the Trump administration. That is not why we're here. It does not bring us great joy. It is a massive undertaking of time, of care, of human beings in our office who are oftentimes doing their day job of the normal things that we do as a state AG's office. Somebody mentioned you did a critical conversation on the opioid addiction and the opioid settlements. Like, we would much rather be pursuing protections for Minnesotans on the harms that we have full jurisdiction to undertake, such as suing the opioid manufacturers and getting historic returns on the harm that they did. We also acknowledge that of the litigation that we've undertaken, both in the first Trump administration and this Trump administration, it will not be litigation that solves the crisis and problem that we're confronting. We will do what we can and are doing what we can. And others who are also suing, on the behalf of nonprofits or on behalf of universities. Litigation in the courts are tools that are available to us, and we have full faith in them. But we are all being tested in ways that I think it's important every time we stand up and talk about this litigation, that we also set the record straight that it is not the solution in and of itself to the crisis that we're in as a country. And that really is, I think, part of this conversation. How do we do all things at the same time? We will use our lane, we will use our authority, we will use our brilliance and our staff's brilliance to protect Minnesotans, protect both Minnesota and the U.S. Constitution and the laws that have been passed by Congress and the funds that have been dedicated by Congress to be used for their proper allocations. But ultimately, the crisis that confronts our immigrant and refugee communities and everybody else that's vulnerable and targeted by this administration will be corrected through you all, through voting, through action, through making sure it is clear that the policies and the direction of the administration do not represent the will of, I would assume, this crowd and many other folks. I'm encouraged by some of the polling, even on the polling of immigration within the first 100 days, that show concerns with the direction the administration is taking. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to look at it. I think, you know, I interpret that some of that is what we always knew, that when the American public understand what happens when mass enforcement and deportation hits someone you know, or you can understand what it's actually doing, that people will not accept that in the numbers that voted for it, even though Trump was explicit about what he wanted to do. It's very different when you read about a 4-year-old citizen with cancer. So what are we doing? The executive actions that the Trump administration has governed through in these first 100 days, including 2 yesterday, are an attempt by the administration to accelerate an agenda, a set of policies that he very well could pursue through a normal engagement with Congress. One of the first bills, if not the first bill, was the Lake and Riley Act that Congress passed. We know in this country we have a tradition of passing laws and following processes. That's not what he's doing. And because of the focus of executive actions, they are making mistakes, whether they care or not. It is our job to point those out and to bring those before a neutral court and say, you know, this shall not stand. The first filing, I don't know if it was 1 day or 2 days, was on birthright citizenship, right? Kim Van Ark, whose case went to the US Supreme Court, son of undocumented Chinese immigrants from the 19th century. The Supreme Court has interpreted the 14th Amendment of the Constitution consistently over and over again, that anyone born on US soil is and shall be a US citizen. For us, the willingness to come out of the gate, write the executive order and publish it and say, that's wrong, we will be the ones that interpret the 14th Amendment and the Constitution, was one way to go about announcing your bold agenda, but it also showed us a disregard for the law. And we hope that people will eventually see, as hopefully the Supreme Court affirms our litigation in that case, that even this president will be accountable to the law. Other cases, and I'll go through these quickly, sanctuary cities, funding and commandeering, the realigning of the refugee admissions program, turning off, you know, on day one, any future, at least temporarily under the executive order, future refugee resettlement, the attempts to shut down temporary protected status for a multitude and hundreds of thousands of people who are legally here now. We also are involved in protecting DACA. There's 2 different federal cases, one that is still a holdover from Trump 1, and one that's venued in North Dakota around whether DACA recipients can qualify for the Affordable Care Act. A couple additional matters. We have been involved in supporting the litigation for student visa revocations, student visa holders. I think I can say this. We were poised to file our own litigation yesterday, but for the about course, which is a good thing. of the administration, even if it's temporary, and reinstating student visas. And of course, the big stick that the administration carries in all of their immigration funding, and it's seen in the most recent executive orders, is their threatening of withholding funds from every state and locality that they determine to be a sanctuary jurisdiction. And so that is a fight that we know will come to Minnesota, and that we will be ready for. In closing, I can't say enough about the importance of gatherings like this at this moment. I know that this conversation is about how to accompany and how to be a meaningful ally and a meaningful resource to vulnerable communities, and I applaud you for being here. I'm sure that the additional speakers will give you multiple ways in which you can do that. From my perspective, both in my old life and my new life, I will say, you know, we have spoken at a couple different large gatherings of immigrants, and the one hopeful thing that I take away from that is that people are engaged. People are here for the right reasons. Immigrants and refugees are here. They make our communities better, and everyone who's been engaged with them, whether it be as employers or as educators, knows that to be true. And it will remain true. It is shockingly self-defeating to sort of go after the very people that we rely on to take care of us in so many different ways, to help renew communities, help take care of our elderly, help inspire new inventions, help populate our higher education institutions, and I could go on and on. And the other thing is that there is, I think, it is still 100 days, but I do think that there is a repudiation of what we're seeing in its cruelest and ugliest terms. And I think we can count on the administration to keep up the negative publicity on the actions that they are taking. And I encourage you to share what you learned tonight, to make it a personal commitment to expand the people that you share information with tonight. And if you see and think of ways in which the Attorney General's office can do a better job or do things differently, we are always open to additional feedback. So with that, I thank you and appreciate the chance.
Thank you very much, John, for providing an overview of the legal strategies as well as the litigation that is occurring at the state and federal levels. Here at UROC, we're very happy to jump in at the university to join others who are having these same conversations about how to accompany, how to advocate on behalf of migrant and indigenous communities. I'd like to point out that the University of Minnesota Law School had a wonderful webinar that discussed providing legal advice to those advocates who are charged with harboring and abetting criminals, undocumented immigrants. It was a wonderful webinar that I encourage you to look at to the law school. We'll also post it here through UROC. But in continuing that discussion about how to be with, operate alongside marginalized communities here in Minnesota, I'd like to shift the discussion to our panelists, and I'd like to introduce them, starting from your left to the right. We are joined by Xavier Vasquez, who is the Executive Director of Centro Tyrone Guzman. Next, we have Nalima Satate Munene, the Executive Director of the African Career Education and Resources. Last but not least, we have Hannah Lucier, the Program Director of Adult Mental Health at Red Lake Nation's Mino Bemadaziwin Wellness Clinic. So how I'd like to proceed is we'll have some prepared questions for our panelists, and after they have a chance to answer those questions, we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. All right. So my first question for the panelists, in our current political climate that John had just described, and responding to some of the things that the Chief Deputy Attorney General has opened with, in your minds, what are the biggest concerns and challenges facing migrant and tribal communities, and how might your organizations be responding? And I'll leave it up to the panelists to decide who would like to start. There we go.
I think I could start, yeah, sure. Well, hi, everybody. Very honored to be here today with you. I really think one of our most urgent threats right now is criminalization of migration. And we are, something that we've been hearing, is like how people are in constant fear all the time, right? And then not just for deportation, but also for like being separated from their children, just for like being private, for like losing access, to basic needs like healthcare, education. So at Centro, we mostly work with Latina families. Can you hear me well? Closer? Perfect. Can you hear me better now? Perfect. So at Centro, we work mostly with Latina families. And many of them were mixed status or undocumented. And what is going on right now too is like we're not just worried about our mixed status or undocumented participants, but also the people that have their documents, right? That even have the language. And they have every piece of proof, right? And still they being targeted just for being Latinas. And that is also a concern that we do have at our organization. I don't know if you heard this story from like Luis Islas. He's a fundraiser for the University of Minnesota in Duluth, and how he was violently targeted when he was going on a trip to Texas for a conference, and then on his way from the airport to the conference, police officers like tried to like blame him for having things in the car. Like he had the language, he had the proof of everything, he had even like his IDs, everything from the University of Minnesota, still being targeted for being Latina and having this very, violent situation happening to him, just for being racially targeted. So, and this is someone, with everything, with the language, right? Imagine someone that only speaks Spanish. I fear all the time for my wife. My wife is learning English, and I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen if she's driving around, right? And something happens, and then she doesn't understand what's going on, and that's a constant fear that I have. But that's also is a reminder of like no amount of documentation or preparation can fully protect us from biases, and that is very concerning. So at Centro we've developed different plans, right? And we developed departmental plans. So at Centro we work with different generations from like babies to elders. In each one of the departments, we develop like a plan of like what will happen if a kid is not picked up from school. What happens if we're driving a youth to their house and their parents are being taken away by ICE. Like all of these plans that we have now for Centro, still like it was a very scary process to go through all these plans and scenarios. And we did those with a lawyer, right? And even the lawyer, who is Latino, asked us not to put his name in anything related to the plans or like anything that will go out. And we're like, we got even more concerned, right? So it is a reality. Like right now, for example, we're sending 3 teachers to get certified in Texas. So this is the last 3 trip out of 4 trips that they had to go to Texas during this whole year. And they've been certified with the only American Montessori International trainer in Spanish in the whole US, right? So our 3 teachers, only 1 person in the whole US, they're getting certified with this person. And they're going to Texas in June. And we're wondering, like, what do we need to do as an organization? Like, do we have to make local connections and make sure, that in case something happens, we have someone we can contact? Because these 3 people, their native language is Spanish, and they don't know English, right? So we're particularly concerned about that. And it's a reality, and we're working with that at Centro. But at Centro, we focus on providing that safe space, building that trust, letting the families know, like, we're there, like, this is a safe space for them, and our building will protect them no matter what. And not just to, like, meet their basic needs, but also to help them, like, feel seen, heard, and connected.
Well, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Thank you. I think I'll just jump right in. I think for the African immigrant community, we are facing a lot of the same challenges, similar to what has been talked about by Xavier. But one of the main things is just, the erosion of due process as an immigrant community, that folks are automatically criminalized, and even when there's an error committed, there's no opportunity, to correct that. And for some people, it can be a very serious situation. So, for example, we have, when refugees come to this country, a lot of people come without documentation because they're fleeing for their lives, right? And in our community, we have literally had people who have been deported, but deported to the wrong country, right? And now you can imagine being deported to a place where you have never been, you don't know anybody there, and those countries are being forced to accept, to accept those people, and which, gives people in a very dangerous situation. Another big thing we're seeing in our community is, of course, families are being torn apart in 2 ways. So as an immigrant, I can tell you, for most immigrant families, the immigration law is never consistent. If you've ever had to deal with immigration, it is never consistent. And so in any given family at any time, folks can have different immigration statuses for whatever reason, because the law keeps on changing, right? Before everybody completes, changing their status over. And so there's that fear that some people are U.S. citizens, some people are in the process of getting their green card, and things are changing every day, and there's this huge danger of families being separated. Another big thing that happened is, when this administration came on, they have stopped the refugee resettlement. And there were some folks whose paperwork had already been approved, and so there's some families that have been separated for 20 years. And, we know some families who have been separated for a very long time, and kids were just planning to come, and now they are stuck in another country. And here's another reality. At least in the African continent, not every country has a U.S. embassy, right? And so when you're getting ready to come, you have to go to the nearest U.S. embassy, which may be like 3 or 4 countries away. So if you have traveled, so there's some folks who have traveled for that same purpose, and then the refugee resettlement was canceled, and they're kind of stranded, in whatever countries that they had gone, in order to be able to be repatriated. And so there's a lot of stress within the community. There's a lot of isolation. It's very hard to trust folks. People are not being very forthcoming about what they're experiencing and what their statuses are. We have seen a lot of, it's taking a mental toll on folks. I think in early January, I think one of the first phone calls I got was from a mental health practitioner, right? Yes. And from the community, and he said, we are seeing a lot of folks in distress, and something needs to be done about that. So we know that this is taking a huge toll on people. The other one thing I want to talk about is economic exploitation. So a lot of folks are being exploited in a variety of ways. First of all, from before, we know that folks who are undocumented were having a difficult time just getting basic needs such as housing, and some unscrupulous landlords, finding out somebody doesn't have a social security because we do a lot of housing work, were refusing to rent to them, or some people were being told straight up by landlords, and it's still happening again right now, I am going to charge you, $500 more, right? And somebody, and folks are going to accept that. And also they're being asked to you have to put down 3 times the deposit, for the rent, and they're doing that only to undocumented people. Another thing that is happening in terms of economic exploitation is because people are just being grabbed from the street or whatever, some folks have homes and cars and etc. that they're leaving behind, and who's taking care of that property? And it leaves them wide open for folks just to come and, grab this stuff, and there is no recourse, right? And, but even without that, there are some folks who they're experiencing, we had some folks come to us, they took their car to repair, I don't know what the mechanic did to them, but then they're in this situation where they're being threatened. Well, you can't complain. I'm going to call ICE on you. Tenants, we do a lot of housing justice work. Tenants cannot complain about their landlords not repairing their apartment units, or even being asked to take care of repairs themselves, or just getting ridiculous charges, about repairs that are not exactly done. But they're being told they cannot complain because I'm going to call ICE on you. So what are we doing as an organization? Information is key. So I see Michelle here. I know we've held a number of immigration forums with advocates for human rights. Information is always key. We're trying to equip our community with as much information as we can, but also at the same time being very clear that even with all this information, and even if you're a green card holder, you could still be targeted, and you could still be ferried away. You might not come back home to your family. And that is something that puts you, in a helpless situation. But we do believe that arming our community members with information, is the best that we can. We're trying to support people in our community as much as possible to make sure that, that they have enough money for rent, that they have enough food, for their families, that, if folks are afraid to drive to the grocery store, arranging for rides, and making sure that folks are not suffering, in isolation, by themselves, that they can ask for a ride when they need to. Just basically doing the human thing, apart from all the other legal stuff that you can do.
Thank you. Bonjour. Maganaduk. My name's Hannah, and I'm a member of the Red Leg Nation. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thank you for spending this time with me and with the group. This question immediately popped out to me as, oh my gosh, how do we even begin? Where do we start? It's almost like you kind of want to laugh at it a little bit, and then you realize the seriousness of thinking about what are the urgent issues facing Native communities. So there's a number of things that came to mind that I really want to touch on and talk about. The first one is treaty rights. So I work at the Mino Bimaditsiwen Wellness Clinic. In the Ojibwe language, Mino Bimaditsiwen means the good life. So our goal is to provide culturally appropriate healthcare for our Native relatives who come in to see us. And part of what we do is largely dependent on federal funding for our healthcare programs. And so what we're really seeing right now in this current administration is a huge cut in funding, or even just freezing funds and grants right now. And that takes a large toll on our ability to provide services for our Native families and community. But why this is really important is because of treaty rights. So over the course of the 18th and 19th century, more than 400 treaties have been signed between Native nations and the United States, the federal government. And oftentimes in concession for giving away land or other concessions, the United States promised Native nations that they would provide resources such as education or healthcare or subsistence resources. So these are legally binding agreements that we see in treaties. It's important because, as the United States Constitution says, treaties are the law of the land, and for the most part, our communities have had a history of treaties not being upheld. However, yet again, we're seeing this happen in today's year of 2025, right? As mentioned earlier, there was a federal or an executive order signed by President Joe Biden. This one was called Reforming Federal Funding and Support for Tribal Nations to Better Embrace Our Trust Responsibilities and Promote the Next Era of Tribal Self-Determination. So this was an executive order signed by President Joe Biden, and the point of it was to make it easier for tribes to access federal funds, right, which is this legal obligation that the United States has for tribal nations. And also part of this executive order is that tribes would have a greater autonomy to use the federal funds and determine where is the necessity for the money to go. Makes some sense, right? The communities to decide where the need is and where we can allocate those resources. And as of February of this year, the Trump administration revoked this executive order. So that action right there was a direct assault on tribal sovereignty and self-governance. And what we're also seeing is it's an act of the United States, their federal government, pulling back on their legal obligations towards tribes in the U.S. I wanted to talk too a little bit about how some of these suspensions for federal grants and funding freezes, how they might affect us. Currently, nothing has been acted on right now, but part of this Project 2025 that a lot of us are familiar with and have heard about their effort is to reduce Medicaid and Medicare funding. And within Indian country, it's almost about 20% of individuals rely on Medicaid for their healthcare coverage. At the Mino Bimaditziwin Wellness Clinic, over 90% of our clients have Medicaid. And that's who we bill for. So part of our organizational structure is that we rely on the reimbursement for Medicaid. Now, if that happens to be the case where this is cut or that type of there is a move towards privatized healthcare, it would be devastating for our clinic in particular, right? We wouldn't be able to. It wouldn't be sustainable for us, and therefore we wouldn't be around and able to provide services for our Native community. We're located right over in Minneapolis in the South Side, Phillips neighborhood, which is it's not a coincidence. That's a very large population for urban American Indian people in the area. And there's several other different organizations in the area too. And so it's not just our clinic that relies on this type of funding, but a lot of the other community-based organizations in the area that would be affected. Thank you.
My next question involves political systems. We've seen how law enforcement agencies have come to reinforce one another. in response to Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. For example, in response to a Black Lives Matter rally, ICE agents came to reinforce local police officers and forcibly quell peaceful demonstrators in Seattle. Currently, ICE raids have raised the alarms for tribes whose citizens are being unjustly detained and questioned. So I would like to invite any panelists who are willing to talk about this. How might these struggles that we are witnessing involving Indigenous sovereignty and also migrant rights, how might these be interconnected, if at all?
I would love to jump in if that's okay. That's an excellent question, and I love the challenge to reflect on things like that. And what comes to mind for me is that, well, first of all, migrant communities are also Indigenous somewhere, right? So in this continent, which is now called America, the Americas, traditionally people had pathways to move and ebb and flow as they pleased, with their own communities. And now we have these very strict borders and very strict rules. But what I'm noticing is that both communities, Indigenous communities and migrant communities, have a shared experience of colonialism and marginalization. Here, the American Indian people in the United States, have 500 plus years of colonization, and because of that have suffered through lasting effects of land dispossession and cultural assimilation and genocide. But also migrants, particularly those who are refugees or forced migrants, they're also experiencing displacement and violence, just as the American Indian people here did too. And so I see those similarities, and I draw that quite well. And also, as discussed earlier, some of the federal government policies that are used right now to attack Indigenous sovereignty by denying self-determination resonate with me in the way that migrants are now being denied their own self-determination, right? That's the right to the freedom to choose how one lives, right? So we're sort of seeing this parallel or crossover, actually, rather, of oppressive powers, such as immigration laws and policies that limit and deny self-determination for migrant communities that the Native people here have experienced for hundreds of years.
Sure. I was reflecting on this question, and I agree with what Hannah said. I think the one thing I want folks to remember is nobody leaves home just because they want to, and come to live in a different culture, in a place where they do not speak the language, and come to start life over again and live alone, or, live parts of their family and be separated, from them for over, for 20 years. So there's some sort of external forces that force people to leave their homes, and it's the same oppressive forces that that keep people oppressed here in the United States, that forced Native American nations from their land, and into reservations, etc. And so these systems continue to perpetuate this oppression. And I think as an immigrant, you find out, you get here and you find out, you're like, oh, okay, these are the same folks who colonized us. So, it is a continuous process. I think for me, one of the things that really resonate with is narrative. Narrative is really, really important, right? And so on top of all this stuff, the reason I think this oppression has continued is because there's a certain narrative that has been created and crafted about why things are the way they are, and also about the people, who are being oppressed by the oppressor. For me, one of the main things that I think about is there has to be a certain kind of thinking behind actions that are taken in order to be able to oppress people. And I think there's some critical questions that we have to ask ourselves as a society, wherever we are and whatever our race is, right? I think when we look at whether it's immigrants, the Black community here, the indigenous community, and why a lot of this oppressive acts continue is somewhere along the line, I think we have, there's a narrative that has been created that has made it okay for some people, to be treated in a certain way, or that has made it okay for some people to be, to leave without having, enjoying full human rights for over 400 years, for over 500 years, and every type of excuse or narrative is created, and somewhere, somehow, folks who have the power just, continue buying into it. And I think that is a critical question, and I think that is a similarity, that exists between, the current immigrants right now in the United States, and the indigenous communities. And even when we talk about, the resources that are given to whatever communities, the reality is that it's never enough. It's never enough. But then again, there's always this narrative that is created that, folks should be grateful. Folks should be grateful that they're being supported. Refugees should be grateful that their country was burning and, the United States opened their borders, but nobody's really asking why. It doesn't make sense that that countries can be destabilized, for over 50 years, or that, that these countries were never stable after colonization, right? And also that the weapons and the machinery and the tools that are being used to destabilize these nations are not found in those countries, are manufactured in other parts of the world that folks don't have, that don't have access to. So there are many critical questions that, that need to be asked about the situation that we face. And hopefully this can be a moment of reckoning that we don't just gloss over it, but really begin to ask some critical questions about why are things the way they are? How did they come to be? And what are we going to do to change that?
At Centro, everything we do, right, is rooted in community. And to Hannah's point, many of the families that we serve are indigenous. So they come from Guatemala, Ecuador, Mexico, and they carry these beautiful ancestral traditions and often feel invisible in systems that weren't made for them. So these are people that also kind of like going on Hannah's point, they were pushed off their land by violence, right? And here they're being treated as criminals when they're trying to find a better life, and that when they come here for safety. So that's what we're dealing right now with our immigrants community, our Latina communities, right? And for us, standing with indigenous people, our indigenous community means that understanding that colonialism, it actually never ended. It just looks different now. And the truth is, like, none of us will be free until all of us are. So
I would like to turn to our student community first before we go to the Q&A. And I think with the Q&A, many of us probably, including myself, are just wondering, what can I do, right? After hearing all of these things, what are some of the ongoing actions that we can take to stand with communities under attack? But before we get there, if I could turn to our students. To date, and again, I wrote these prepared comments a while back, so horrifyingly, they might be different. I don't know. But at the time of writing, at least 27 international students from 13 Minnesota colleges and universities have had their visas revoked or immigration records terminated. And as students continue to speak about a range of issues, right, from migrant rights to these political systems that we just talked about, to Palestinian solidarity, and a resistance to the current political climate, tell us what could be done to improve the support and protection of student voices on campus. So, and again, I open this up to those who want to go there, but how might community-based organizations, educational institutions like the U, and also U.S. citizens work together to respond in these moments of political and social crises?
So yeah, we do work a lot with international students, and one of the greatest needs that international students have is support. There's so many international students who come here, they're on their own. They do not have any family connections, and that is really a big deal. And so just being able to provide that support and be family to them is also critical. A lot of them also can be, very young, right? My mom and my aunties came to school at the University of Minnesota way back when in the 60s, was straight from high school. My sister came to this country as an international student. She was barely 17 years old on her own, with no family around either. So there are many international students who don't have that family connection at all, and so just providing support from them, whether it's the college or the institution, finding out who has family and who can they be connected to. These things are changing every day. There is new information every day. Even when we share information, we're always having a disclaimer. This could change the very moment we send it out to you. So, and which can also be nerve-wracking. In terms of how can students lend their voices, I think institutions, whether both community organizations and both college campuses, etc., can create safe spaces for students to be able to express themselves. I think having a forum like this is one way for folks to get information, but how do we create those spaces for students to be able to express themselves, whether it's through a student club or just having conversations, because people want to be heard, people want to express themselves. So I think colleges and universities can also think critically about how do they create that safe space to give students voice, where it's not necessarily them being out protesting in the street and etc., but where they can engage in meaningful conversation in a safe way that is not necessarily going to expose them to being picked up by ICE or collected by ICE. Lastly, I will say, so mental health is a really important part of this whole equation, and so checking on students, and not just the international students. I think there's a lot more work that college campuses can do during this moment to ensure the mental health and stability of students. And also for international students, they don't have the luxury of, even if this thing takes a mental toll on them, they are now being required to still take a full load of classes. Think about how you can support your students, especially international students, to be able to take a semester off if they need to, without jeopardizing their status, because they are going through a whole lot and most of them don't really have that external support.
I think community-based organizations and academic institutions can really partner in creating that safe space, like Nalima was saying. I would love to see students take some know your rights, trainings, and if you're going to be out there and protesting in the streets or going to rallies, figure out a good safe way to do that. Know the numbers that you need to call if you were detained or arrested. Have those written on your arms. I think these are kind of especially community-based organizations and academic institutions could pull together to give some of these trainings and seminars for people to be able to know what their rights are when they're using their voice in a wonderful way. I love the concept that, yes, it takes such an emotional toll for these students that we're seeing, all of them, because a lot of people might not be going through it personally or being detained personally, but their classmates are and their friends and family are. And I do think we're quite fortunate in Minneapolis to have a lot of community-based mental health organizations that are culturally specific. We have a number of culturally specific Native organizations. I know there are different ones that are specific for mental health across the city for the various cultural communities that we have here. And I think those are the resources we want to make sure we're utilizing and letting students know that this is what's available. If maybe we don't have something on campus here, but you still need some support and you want it to be culturally specific, let's let them know what these resources are, where they can go, where they can find those healing and safe spaces. And perhaps community organizations can also hold healing and safe circles, right? Let's talk about this as a community, about the things that we're confronting and challenging and how it takes a toll on all of us.
This is a painful reminder of when you challenge power, you can become a target. And that is something that is very unfortunate. I feel as community organizations, right, it's our time to show up for people, and to know that we're fighting the same fight. But also, it's interesting. I'm part of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits board and the co-vice chair, and something that we've been hearing too is how organizations also are afraid of becoming targets, right? And now it's what's currently going on, the last news, right, about sanctuaries, and it's starting to become even more a reality. So, and to be honest and to be really transparent, right, it sounds ideal that we are working in collaboration, and a lot of that work is happening. I'm so grateful. Also, nonprofit leaders are tired. Nonprofits already were stretched by itself, and now we're being asked to navigate different scenarios and uncertainty, and not only deal with the mental toll of this is what can happen to the 3,000 participants you're working with. Or that you serve, but also this is something that can happen to your family, to your neighbor, to your friends, and so it's it's all the time trying to figure out, that's what it has become, is figuring out what we need to do, and so to that first question, right, what are the most urgent threats, right, and it's very unclear, and it's kind of have you. And this is something, we were talking with the staff, is how when you are in a fight or flight mode, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part for reasoning, it just blocks itself, right? So I feel a lot of leaders are in that mode of what do I do right now? So that reasoning is not happening as it should, right? And this is just in our biology, right? And so people, I'm really grateful, right? Because as we are showing up for our communities, and I see some faces here too of people that have reached out to Centro, and they're what can I do? Kind of a segue to what's next, but what can we do? We're here, right? And I bet this is just a space for allies. This is a moment where allies are more powerful than ever.
Thank you to the panelists. I also want to give a shout out to Jasmine Adams. Is she here still? Jasmine, we were so fortunate to have Jasmine as our graduate research assistant, and she prepared the questions for our panelists today, so I really, really appreciate it. Now we have some time dedicated to asking some questions to the panelists.
My name's Rebecca. I'm an activist with Indivisible, and one of the things that we've been thinking about, especially related to the cases of people who are being picked up off the streets and taken to places like prisons in El Salvador. A lot of what we hear in the media is those referred to as deportations. And we've stopped using that term because it seems inaccurate in that it's a legal process, and a lot of what is happening is not legal. So just wondering if you want to comment on that.
I think, narrative matters. narrative is very important, and I think just continuing to frame, illegal actions and calling them as such is helpful. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. My thoughts might be a little scattered, but I'm going to try my best. So I think one way to think about nonprofit organization is also that we do have a lot to do with like fundraising, right? And I'm a professor, by the way, not like in nonprofit organization, whatever. But I was wondering because, thinking back in the past decade with the DEI initiative, right? A lot of the sort of corporate section and entity in this country definitely jumps in. I was wondering because, and also like from a legal perspective, not everything, right? Like undocumented immigration, who's basically the workforce, invisible workforce around a lot of productions and care and support of the economic system of this country. Like everything has to do with a sort of corporate entity as well. So I was wondering if these type of questions, I guess to the audience as well and to everyone who wants to think along with me, what are some of the tools or what are some of the languages or what are some of the strategies of mobilizations that we can do at this point? Because I do think that the collective mobilization is very important at this point too, right, for the protections of a lot of vulnerable populations. So any thoughts, ideas, or comments would be, very much appreciated. Thank you.
So it sounds like the question is a little bit about like what can we do as individuals?
And also the fundraising situation.
Fundraising things.
How do we work around that? So
yeah. Well, if this is partly of the answer, I think it's really important, if anyone can, to contribute to things like legal aid funds. That's what comes to mind too. Let's see here. Maybe even contributing to organizations, kind of like using if you have it, your power and privilege in a way. If you can make donations to local organizations who are going through things, that would be also quite helpful. I'm not sure if that entirely answered part of the question, though.
Just to touch a little bit on that too, I feel it's also, like meet with your organizations, right, and like try to meet them where they're at, where they are at. In our case, for example, like we might jump into we've been talking about expansion at Centro as the oldest Latina serving organization, right? But we're in a time right now where we're bumping up our marketing, we're adding another development staff, but we're like, do we grow now? Like, is this our time? Even though time says it makes a lot of sense, and all of our program have a wait list, and so we're navigating through those different scenarios, and I feel it's like meet with your nonprofits, and this is a time to also say, right, like this is our time for operating support. Yes, those type of funds help not only the organization itself, but also it helps a lot their leaders, development executive directors, their leaders in such a way that we can focus right now on strategy rather than just trying to find those operating funds that we need for the organization and how our funds are stretching in that way as well.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the panelists for what you do, because it's a big job and it's gotten even bigger in these times. I'm a retired public health person, and I didn't go home. I kind of bum myself around and pick up contract work around various agencies. And in January, I started just talking to different agencies across the state just to see how they were preparing for the new administration, and had gotten a little network going and got information, and I started sharing it with some of the organizations that I worked with, and all of a sudden things just got stalled, and I was getting iced out, and I said, what's going on? And I realized that some of the organizations that I was working with were getting information from their legal counsel in terms of how they conduct business and what have you. And, I guess I'm just making a statement. I don't know if I'm asking a question, but I'm really concerned about how organizations are being counseled. So this whole thing about misinformation or accurate information is so critical. And then, I'm in healthcare. And so again, even with some of the things, I was talking to some of the managers and how they were focused was on their clients, but they were not focused on their employees. I said, you have a lot of employees that are on work visas or may have families that are in various, stages of immigration. So think about what's happening to them. Or if they decide to go home and for whatever reason they don't come back. So how are you changing your HR policies and procedures to protect your employees? I'm just so amazed that I've been sitting in all these spaces. And then last week, no, it might have been this week, I was in a meeting and folks were talking about the cuts in Medicaid and how drastic they are. And then I have a daughter who has a chronic illness, and so we use the University of Minnesota a lot. And during COVID, I hated going there because you'd have like 3 and 4 beds out in the corridors. And I said, just think about all of these rural hospitals who depend on Medicaid that are going to close. How are they going to crush our healthcare system in the metro area? I think we're talking to the wrong folks. I'm glad to see the people here. And I had sent the announcement out to a lot of folks. I said, maybe you should come and we'll learn something, because it really is about collective, and it is about safe space, and it is about accurate information. So I'm here to learn, but I'm just curious, how do we work with these corporations and the advice that they're getting from their legal counsel, though?
I just wanted to pick up on the theme of what individuals can do. So certainly I would hope that everyone here is voting and protesting and donating. I was curious about 2 things. One, if there are volunteer opportunities with your organization and what kinds of assistance people can offer. And the second is, if we are a bystander and witness an ICE abduction, to your point, what do you recommend bystanders do to be as helpful as possible? I don't know if you pulling out the cell phone is the best thing to do. It doesn't seem like we have any rights to ask about identification of the agents, but if there are tips around how bystanders can be supportive of the families who are affected, that would be really helpful too. So 2-part question: volunteer opportunities with your organization and bystander allyship.
Okay, I can jump on. So yes, we do have volunteer opportunities. People can go to www.acerinc.org to figure out, and there are many volunteer opportunities. And the other thing I want to emphasize is, we also do a lot of economic justice work. We support a lot of micro businesses that are owned by immigrants that are suffering as well. A lot of the business owners are in mixed statuses as well, but also a lot of folks are not patronizing their businesses as well. And so they're losing a lot of income, and they need to be supported. As my counterpart executive director has said here, as an executive director of nonprofits, of course, funding is always an important part, and especially flexible funding. So a lot of our community members have unique needs, and we want to be able to support them. Yes, we want to give folks information, legal information, but also sometimes the reality is people do need money. People need money to make their rent. Some people are working 2 jobs, and they can only go to 1 job. And then we know for the longest time people felt secure with working with their ITIN numbers. That has become risky for people. So there's a huge financial gap in that sense. I want to say one thing about what can individuals do. So a lot of times, folks talk to me about what this administration is doing and how it is scary and etc. And I always tell people, I am more concerned, and you should be more concerned about your neighbors, the folks you go to church with, or whatever else you go, who actually supported this agenda, right? So these folks are our neighbors. They go to the same schools as our kids. Some of them are our family members, whether we're closely or distantly related. Like, we have to have these conversations. This is where I put on my organizer hat on and say that, one-on-one relationships, you do not change things. You only change things one conversation at a time. And we have to build relationships. So as an immigrant, I'll tell you, it's always this interesting conversation every time before Thanksgiving for there's some conversations that should not be had at the Thanksgiving table. Totally have it. I don't know where I'm from. We have differing political opinions, but we always have this because who else is going to have these conversations? If we're only having conversations with people who think like us and agree with us, and etc., we are not going to change anything. People voted for this stuff, and who are those people? We know those people, and we do life with these folks, right? So we should stop having these conversations only in forums or when we go to work, etc. Talk to your cousins, call your relatives, everybody. We have to have these conversations. They have to become dinner table conversations, happy hour conversations, and that is what is going to move the needle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben, and I'm an international student here since 2018. And, my concern is, be honest with you, most of the international students now are living with fear. And I'm not afraid of what the Trump administration is doing. I'm more afraid and concerned about what the university or the state are doing, because we don't feel protected anymore. You can be at the wrong place at the wrong time. You can be deported. So what's your real step or action you're taking to protect us today? That's my concern. Thank you.
Sounds like the question is, what are the steps to protect yourselves as international students? Correct. Yeah.
University or the states.
Right. And I think that's a a multi-tiered answer, right? So the university has a big obligation for that, as well as community-based organizations. But I would love to refer back to a comment I made earlier about tune into knowing your rights. Right, and maybe even have a backup plan. If you are here as an international student, draw that up immediately. Who will you call? Who do you reach out to? Have a action plan, and you can give it to somebody else in the event that something bad happens. Right, in the event that maybe you're detained. We talk about something similar in Indian country with the missing and murdered indigenous women's epidemic. A lot of times we talk to our community members and our women about coming up with if I go missing plan, because it's such an epidemic, and then sharing that with a loved one. And I think that could be an option too for international students. If something happens to me, if I'm detained, if something goes wrong or I'm feeling unsafe, this is where I want to go. These are the people I need to contact.
So I think one of the difficult things in this moment is I think in the previous time in Trump 1.0, there were some spaces that ICE could not really go into, and I think a lot of that has changed. Like I said before, we work with international students, so I know a lot of international students, and one of the things too that and I know we have talked to some college campuses as well, is even just about the communication. So for example, we worked with one institution because I think all these orders came up and the director of international students was sending all these emails and etc., and they thought they were being helpful, but they came across as very threatening emails. They were factual, but the way they were presented, they were sharing factual information, but there was really no conversation in the emails about, and also they had a meeting of all the international students, and they delivered the facts, but there was really no additional information about how the institution was going to be supportive. And so we've had a number of meetings with that particular school about what are you really how are you offering help to international students? I know another issue that some students have encountered is about the requirement that students have to go to school, to classes, in person. International students are not allowed to take, online classes. But we have some folks who are nearing towards the end of their major, and the school is just not offering any in-person classes, and they're expecting international students to still take a full load and to take extra classes to get to take classes they don't need in order to to maintain their status, which is very which is very difficult. I mean, on the one hand, they're saying it's a federal requirement and they cannot do anything about it, but you can offer in-person classes, but the school doesn't offer. So there are a lot of challenges, and yes, there's still a lot of work that, and I understand that this is a new space that, a new challenge that educational institutions are facing. But I think the problem with that is that it is putting, there's this default attitude that the international student is just going to, is going to take up that burden, whereas the institution does have the authority and the ability to dictate how those classes should be administered. And I think another point that we have come across also is also the requirement, for the health insurance, which is really expensive, and to be honest with you, is not very helpful. And like I mentioned before, there are folks who have mixed statuses and families, and we're seeing international students are being prohibited from even having insurance through their parent, even if their parent is here legally, and still being told, well, you're still going to have to pay, in order to be in compliance, to pay for an insurance that you're not going to use. And to be honest, that is not very helpful. So there's still a lot of work for institutions, to do in terms of supporting international students. As community organizations, we're trying to provide support in having these conversations with with some of the higher education institutions that we're in relationship with.
Thank you for being here tonight, and you have all just put a fire inside of me that was there, but it's very much reignited. And one piece that really spoke to me is something that you spoke to about how do we speak with people who are not in this room? And what are ways that we can do that? And Nalimi, you talked a little bit about family and happy hour. And, I have tried to speak with my family, and I get very shut down. I don't think we should be talking about politics, is the answer I get. So I'm just curious, anybody in the room, any of you, if there is a forum that could, such as this, that we open up to all, and it's not, I want to learn. I have some idea from cousins and whatnot that are very business, small business, bottom line. So that's what I'm curious about.
So I'm gonna make it quick. I'm an undergrad with healthcare management, and so my question to you guys is, I noticed you mentioned that there has been some fear mongering within businesses of, saying, hey, if you're undocumented, I could call ICE on you. Have you noticed any of that within the healthcare field? And also, how can healthcare workers help undocumented or migrants and indigenous people feel welcome to still come to their clinics and hospitals without fearing that they're going to be called or taken away?
All right, thank you all three for being here again. My question's kind of the same as yours, honestly. I'll add a little bit more to it, though. I guess I'm curious, how do we make politics not a taboo topic to talk about? Because a lot of us don't really know how to do it unless we're doing it with people that we agree with. And even when we're doing it with people that we disagree with on a lot of things, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff that gets dredged up. And we have to manage our own emotions, and oftentimes we have to manage the other person's emotions too. So how do we navigate those conversations and make them more easier to approach or more normalized, I guess, even though it's like a difficult topic to broach, so.
And I can start. I feel it's not an impossible space to create, but I feel it's a very difficult space to create because it has to come from a place of understanding and not a place of like, being right or not, or, like my colleague here said, in my case, for example, I learned I love to talk to people that think differently, different than me, because it's always reassuring, like, to talk to people that think like you, and you're like, oh yeah, me too, that's cool. But when you talk to people that don't think like you, I use that information to first understand them and know where they're coming from. And I found out that a lot of times people come from a place of misinformation, and it also come from my end too. Like, right, I've been able to analyze myself and being like, oh, I actually came from a place of misinformation, right? But that mindset needs to be there. So all of this to say that can happen, but there has to be agreements beforehand to create those spaces. Like, it has to be something very intentional. And I feel in the healthcare space, kind of like touching a little really quick here, but I feel there has been spaces that have created the space before all of this happened, where people felt that was a community space. Just to give you an example, right? La Clínica, which is a space, right, where like they already were working with undocumented folks and like helping them like through, the system. That being said, I feel this is the time for healthcare to make their statement, right? And make sure like that people understand, if this is going to be the place, then kind of like not being silent and like let it out and, for people to know. But that's kind of like my 2 cents in that topic.
So, because I'm an organizer, I want to talk about how we talk to people. So, I think we don't politicize it, especially for folks we have a personal relationship with. I think about it in 2 ways. One, personal stories are very important. I think when we personalize things, when we remove it from the political context, most likely than not, folks know somebody who's undocumented. You may not know they're undocumented, and etc. But I think we have all been, impacted or we're in close proximity. So I think it's about using personal stories and personalizing, the conversation, and especially if those folks, have the relationship. Also thinking about what is an opportune time, and not really, like lecturing people. Like, I just went to the forum and this is what I found out. And this is what is wrong with your way of thinking. That is not going to work very well. Really, if you have raised teenagers, you don't ever ask a teenager, how are you? I'm fine. So you look for the, opportune moment, to have those conversations. It takes time, to build relationships, but, you keep trying. But for me, the biggest thing that I say, that I think can work is personalizing those stories, putting a human face to, to the situation, and just removing all the politics, out of it. Because, how many times, like, I have never met Donald Trump, I have never met Joe Biden, probably will never, so that doesn't matter to me. I am more concerned about the people who I come in contact with, and the people who live next to me, the people who serve my kids lunch, and just asking people their stories and sharing other people's personal stories with people who have a different view than the one that you have.
I love these answers, and I just want to piggyback on some of those, of what's already been said. As a mental health therapist by trade, I really encourage having curiosity with people. So when we go into these conversations, first of all, know when you're doing it, right? If there's somebody who's staunchly opposed to you, and you know this person is not going to be receptive, maybe that's not the person to speak with. We want to sometimes just plant little seeds of ideas, So coming in contact with somebody and asking about what is your experience, and I'm really curious where you're coming from. Tell me about why you believe this, or what in your life has what experiences have had framed your viewpoint of what we're talking about here. People really like to talk about themselves, and sometimes that's a great place to start, is asking other people about their beliefs first and being curious about that and showing empathy. I think it's really important to just always be rooted in love and respect and compassion with other people, not letting them rile you up and acting outside of your values just because they're making you feel upset, right? So knowing when to walk away from a conversation, or to say, I'd really like to pause because it seems like things are getting heated here, and I wanted to talk to you because I'm just curious, right? So knowing some of those relational strategies is going to be really important going into things, and realizing most people aren't going to change their minds, but we can plant those seeds. And don't lose hope. Don't ever lose hope. This is a really serious topic.
And just a final comment on that too. I have a 4 and a 2 years old, and I found out that a lot of the techniques that I use with them, I've had to use it with people too.
That's great. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up. This is my favorite part because I get to say thank you to a whole bunch of people that made this happen. So please hold your applause till the end. Thank you to John Keller for being here and providing our opening comments. Thank you so much to the panelists for providing your wisdom and grounded knowledge. I want to say thank you to Lori Van Egeren for always making public engagement at the forefront of the university, and also the University of Minnesota system, and thinking how important public engagement is as part of our education and research as an academic institution. I want to just acknowledge the UROC team here. My co-directors, Makeda Zulu and Kara Schmidt. You are wonderful colleagues to have. Thank you so much for helping us put this on. Jen Afanamafuna, our new communications specialist, created the wonderful welcoming vibe and the visuals here. We're glad to have you aboard. Claudette Ling, she was behind the curtain, doing all sorts of things. Ordered the food from Amazing Thailand. Is that where we should be acknowledging? Yeah, absolutely. UROC staff in helping us create, again, this welcoming space for you all to be here. And so also thank you all for being here. You took time out of your days to engage in a very difficult topic, and you all met someone cool. And congratulations for that. I really hope you come back to UROC talking about safe spaces to learn, to engage, to learn about resources. That's what we hope to provide at UROC. I hope you come back. You're always welcome. We're welcoming of all people. So thank you for your time. Please stay and eat all this food and drink, and meet other cool people. So thank you again.